I informed my wife's closest companion that I don't need to observe her on a job site to know she's severely incompetent. So, it's been barely 4 hours since this absolute nightmare unfolded, and my wife is currently sleeping in our guest room. Her best friend, Brenda, was supposed to join us for a weekend cabin trip to Lake Tahoe tomorrow, but she sent a furious email canceling, claiming I am a toxic influence who raises arrogant, insufferable teenagers. My wife thinks I pushed things too far and destroyed a friendship. I genuinely believe Brenda dug her own grave. Here is what went down. It started on Sunday morning at 10:15 a.m. Brenda came over to our house in Bellevue, Washington, for brunch. She's a luxury residential appraiser and never stops reminding us of her elite status in the real estate world. Clients are too demanding. Contractors are complete idiots. The housing market is exhausting. We endure this exhausting monologue weekly. She was sitting at our kitchen island after we ate, reviewing some property files for a massive $4.5 million historic estate she was evaluating over in the Queen Anne neighborhood. She casually mentioned the property was a standard 1,905 craftsman. Nothing unusual to report. My 15-year-old son, Leo, is a massive architectural history nerd. He reads zoning archives and structural engineering forums for fun. He poured himself some orange juice, looked at the exterior photo on her tablet, and casually said, "If it's the one on Highland Drive, you should really check the east wall. The 1,905 builds by that specific architect all have sealed-off coal chutes that cause hidden foundation rot." Brenda let out this sharp, patronizing snort, not a friendly chuckle, a deeply mocking sneer. She patted Leo's arm and said, "Buddy, I've been doing high-end valuations for 14 years. I think I know what a coal chute looks like. They stopped putting those in residential builds in 1,898 inches, that specific district." Leo stepped back, his face falling. He muttered quietly, "No, the Harrison firm kept doing it until 1908. Brenda rolled her eyes, talking to him like a slow toddler. "Listen, honey, you play a lot of Minecraft, but the real world requires actual degrees and certifications. The house is pristine. Let the adults do the heavy lifting." I couldn't hold my tongue. I set my coffee mug down hard on the granite. "Actually, Brenda, Leo read a 400-page dissertation on the Harrison firm last month. He knows exactly what he's talking about." She glared at me, her face tightening with disgust. "This is exactly why kids today are so entitled. You indulge his little Wikipedia fantasies instead of teaching him to defer to actual licensed professionals." I felt my jaw clench. "And you're a prime example of an arrogant inspector who is too proud to admit a teenager might know a single fact she doesn't. You don't respect anyone but yourself." Brenda shoved her files into her leather tote bag. "You're ruining your kid by pretending he's a genius," she snapped, storming out of our house and slamming the front door so hard the windows rattled. After she left, I didn't just let it go. I drove down to the King County Records Department on Monday morning. I paid exactly $75.50 to pull the original 1,905 municipal blueprints for that specific address on Highland Drive. Right there, on page 4, was a massive, documented east wall coal chute. I didn't text it to Brenda. I was so angry about her insulting my son's intelligence that I put the blueprints in a thick envelope, attached a sticky note saying, "Might want to check the foundation before finalizing this appraisal," and sent it via certified mail directly to the senior managing partner of her firm. Fast forward to this afternoon at 2:30 p.m. My phone started vibrating off the kitchen counter. It was Brenda, shrieking so loudly I had to hold the phone away from my ear. The managing partner had opened my certified letter yesterday morning. The problem? Brenda had already rushed her final appraisal through on Wednesday, stamping the foundation as completely flawless without doing a proper perimeter check. The new buyers had already waived their independent inspection based entirely on her elite expert valuation. Because of my letter, her boss panicked and sent an emergency structural engineer to the property this morning. They found massive, decaying black mold and severe structural rot exactly where the sealed coal chute was located. A $215,000 repair job. The buyers immediately threatened a massive gross negligence lawsuit against the entire brokerage. Brenda's boss fired her on the spot at 1 p.m. today for professional malpractice. He explicitly told her that if a teenager and his dad could find this in the public municipal archives, her failure to do so was inexcusable. She lost her job, and her state licensing board is opening a formal ethics investigation. Brenda screamed that I destroyed her entire livelihood because my fragile male ego couldn't handle her correcting my kid. I simply told her, "I didn't rot the foundation, Brenda. Your arrogance did." The silence in the house after I hung up was heavy. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was the kind of quiet that feels like it's vibrating. My wife, Sarah, was standing by the refrigerator, her hand gripping the handle so hard her knuckles were white. She hadn't heard the whole conversation, but she'd heard enough of Brenda's screaming through the receiver to piece it together. "You actually sent those blueprints to her boss?" Sarah's voice was low, dangerous. "She called our son a liar and an idiot in our own kitchen, Sarah," I said. I was still riding the adrenaline of the call. She was going to sign off on a multi-million-dollar disaster because she was too lazy to look at a wall. I saved a family from a $200,000 mistake and saved her firm from a lawsuit they would have definitely lost. "You didn't do it for the buyers, Mark. You did it to be right." She didn't wait for an answer. She walked past me, grabbed her keys, and left. She didn't say where she was going. I sat at the island where Leo had been sitting just a few days ago. I looked at the spot where Brenda's tablet had been resting. I felt justified, but the pit in my stomach was starting to grow. About an hour later, the texts started. Not from Brenda, she'd clearly moved on to calling lawyers, but from the Bellevue Moms group chat that Sarah is a part of. Brenda had already posted a long, tear-streaked video on her private Instagram story. I know this because one of the other moms, a woman named Claire who never liked Brenda's elite attitude, sent me a screen recording. In the video, Brenda was sitting in her car, mascara running. She wasn't talking about the coal chute. She was talking about how I had targeted her, how I had stalked her professional files and used inside information to sabotage her career because she stood up to my uncontrolled son. She made it sound like I was some kind of harasser who had been waiting for a moment to ruin her. The comments under the video were a bloodbath. He sent a certified letter to her boss? Who does that? Total power move. So toxic. End. Poor Brenda. 14 years of work gone because of a petty basement dispute. I put the phone down. The narrative was shifting. It wasn't about a professional failing anymore. It was about me being a vindictive neighbor. When Sarah came back at 7 p.m., she wasn't alone. She had Brenda's sister, Melanie, with her. Melanie is a corporate mediator, usually the calmest person I know. But when she walked into my living room, she didn't even take off her coat. "Mark, we need to talk about the legal implications of what you just did," Melanie said. "No, hello, no, how are you?" "I didn't do anything illegal," I said, standing up. "I sent a public record to a business address. You sent a confidential property address and architectural details to a managing partner with the intent to interfere with a contract," Melanie countered. Her voice was cold. "Brenda's firm is looking for a scapegoat to avoid the buyer's lawsuit. They are already talking about tortious interference. They want to argue that you withheld the information until the last second, specifically to cause maximum damage to the firm's reputation." "I sent it the morning after I found out," I shouted. "I didn't even know she'd submitted the appraisal yet." "It doesn't matter what you knew," Sarah interrupted. Her eyes were red. She had been crying in the car. "The firm is being sued for $250,000. Brenda is being sued. And now, Brenda's lawyer told her she might have a case against us. Against Times Our Times Insurance. Against Times Our Times Savings." I looked at Sarah, then at Melanie. The room felt smaller. She ignored a direct warning from a kid who knew more than her, I said, my voice dropping. "How is that my fault?" "Because you didn't call her, Mark," Sarah whispered. "You could have called her. You could have sent a text. You could have pulled her aside. You chose the most destructive path possible because you wanted to see her humiliated. And now, you might have bankrupted us to prove a 15-year-old was right about a chimney." The phone rang again. It was my father-in-law. He's a retired developer who originally helped Brenda get her first internship. I knew before I answered that this wasn't going to be a friendly chat. "Mark," he said, skipping the pleasantries, "I just got off the phone with the board of the firm. They're dropping Brenda, but they're also looking at the timeline of your letter. They're claiming you had the blueprints on Monday, but waited until Wednesday for them to arrive so they couldn't fix the report in time. They're calling it a calculated malicious act." I looked over at Leo's bedroom door. It was cracked open. He was listening. He'd heard everything. He knew that his nerdy hobby had just become the center of a legal hurricane that could wreck our lives. The next morning, the certified mail I'd sent came back to haunt me in a way I hadn't expected. I received an email from the King County Records Department. Apparently, my request for the blueprints had triggered a flag. The property on Highland Drive wasn't just a historic home. It was currently under a specific type of historic preservation easement that I hadn't noticed in my rush to prove Brenda wrong. By pulling those records and distributing them to a third party, the firm's managing partner, without being the property owner or a licensed agent, I had technically violated a secondary privacy clause in the local zoning code regarding unauthorized distribution of structural vulnerabilities. It was a minor administrative fluke, usually ignored unless someone was looking for a reason to burn you, and Brenda's firm was looking. By noon, I had a digital cease and desist in my inbox from the firm's legal counsel. They weren't just protecting Brenda, they were trying to shift the entire liability of the $215,000 rot repair onto me. Their argument was simple. I was an unauthorized interloper who used privileged municipal data to disrupt a private real estate transaction. Sarah didn't even look at the email. She was busy packing a small bag for Leo. "He's going to stay with my parents for a few days," she said, her voice flat. "He's been shaking since he woke up. He thinks he's the reason we're being sued." "He's not the reason," I said, stepping toward her. "Brenda's incompetence is the reason." "Stop saying that name," Sarah screamed. It was the first time she'd ever truly yelled at me like that. "I don't care about Brenda anymore. I care about the fact that our mortgage is tied to a house that might have a lien on it by next month because you couldn't handle a snarky comment over brunch." She walked out to the car with Leo. I watched through the window as my son climbed into the passenger seat, his shoulders hunched, looking like he wanted to disappear into his hoodie. He didn't look like a genius. He looked like a kid who wished he'd never opened his mouth about architectural history. I sat down at my computer. I needed to find a lawyer, but more than that, I needed to see if Brenda was actually as fired as she said she was. I started digging into the firm's recent filings. If I was going to be accused of being a malicious interloper, I might as well see what else the experts were hiding. What I found made the hair on my arms stand up. Brenda hadn't just missed the coal chute on Highland Drive. Over the last 6 months, she had cleared 4 other properties in the same district, all built by the Harrison firm. If Leo was right about their building patterns, those houses were all ticking time bombs of foundation rot, and Brenda's firm had been the lead appraiser for the entire development project. This wasn't just about one house. This was about a pattern of systemic negligence that went way beyond Brenda. She wasn't just an arrogant friend. She was the front woman for a firm that was cutting corners on every historic property in the city. I realized then that my letter hadn't just gotten Brenda fired. It had threatened a multi-million-dollar revenue stream for some very powerful people in Seattle real estate. My phone buzzed. A new message from an unknown number. "Mark, this is David, the senior partner you sent the letter to. We need to meet. Off the record, your certified package opened a door that shouldn't have been opened. Come to the office at 4 p.m. alone. Let's see if we can resolve this before the insurance companies turn your life into a desert." I looked at the clock. 3:15 p.m. I hadn't even showered. I looked at the empty house, the half-eaten brunch leftovers still in the trash from Sunday, and the printout of the blueprints on the table. I wasn't just a dad defending his son anymore. I was a witness to a massive professional fraud, and I had no idea if I was the hunter or the prey. I grabbed my jacket and headed for the door. As I reached for the handle, my doorbell rang. It wasn't David. It wasn't the police. It was Brenda's husband, Scott. He was standing on my porch, and he wasn't screaming. He looked exhausted. He held up a manila envelope of his own. "We need to talk about what Brenda found in your attic 3 years ago, Mark," he said quietly. "The stuff she never reported because you were friends. Because if this goes to court, she's not going down alone. I looked at the envelope. My brain felt like it was moving through wet concrete. 3 years ago, the attic. Of course, the master suite conversion. When Sarah and I bought this house, the attic was just raw joists and fiberglass insulation. When Sarah got pregnant with Leo, we panicked about space. We hired a guy my father-in-law knew, a retired contractor who worked strictly for cash. We put in drywall, a full bathroom, and electrical wiring. We added 800 square feet of livable space to our home, and we never pulled a single city permit. If we had, our property taxes would have skyrocketed. More importantly, the contractor didn't install the required egress windows or upgrade the main breaker panel to code. It was a massive, illegal renovation. Brenda knew. She had come over for a Christmas party right after we finished it. I remembered her standing in the new bathroom, tapping the drywall, asking casually if the city inspector had given us a hard time about the plumbing stack. I had laughed and told her we flew under the radar. She had laughed back. "You're blackmailing me over drywall, Scott?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. "I'm surviving, Mark," Scott said. He didn't look malicious. He looked desperate. "Brenda is losing her license. We have a second mortgage. Her firm is throwing her to the wolves, and the buyers are coming after our personal assets. We are losing everything. And you want to play righteous citizen because she hurt your kid's feelings?" He shoved the manila envelope against my chest. Instinctively, I took it. "There's a draft of a complaint in there," Scott said, his voice flat. "Addressed to the King County Department of Local Services. It details the unpermitted electrical, the illegal plumbing, and the missing egress windows. If you talk to those buyers, if you testify, if you do anything to help her firm establish negligence, I mail it. The city will red tag your house. They'll force you to rip it down to the studs at your own expense. Your insurance will drop you. And given the legal trouble you're already in, the bank might just call in your mortgage." He turned around and walked down the porch steps. He didn't look back. I stood in the open doorway, the cold afternoon air blowing into the hallway. I opened the envelope. There were photos inside. Pictures Brenda had taken at that Christmas party 3 years ago. Selfies of her and Sarah holding wine glasses in the new space, but angled perfectly to show the non-code compliant electrical outlets and the ceiling height. She hadn't just noticed it. She had documented it. The closest companion. I looked at my watch. 3:38 p.m. I had 22 minutes to get to downtown Seattle to meet David, the managing partner who was threatening to sue me for tortious interference. I threw the envelope onto the entryway table, locked the door, and got into my car. The drive across the 520 bridge was a blur of gray water and brake lights. My phone kept pinging in the cup holder. Texts from Sarah asking if I had found a lawyer yet. I didn't answer. I didn't know what to say. "Hey honey, Brenda is blackmailing us over the bathroom, and her boss wants to meet me in a dark alley. How's Leo?" David's office was in one of those soulless glass towers on 4th Avenue. The lobby was all brushed steel and silent security guards. I took the elevator to the 34th floor. The receptionist was gone for the day. A single set of double glass doors was unlocked. I walked in. David was waiting in a conference room at the end of the hall. He looked exactly like a guy who handled $50 million portfolios. He wore a quarter-zip cashmere sweater and a watch that cost more than my illegal attic. He didn't stand up when I walked in. He just gestured to the leather chair across from him. "Mark," he said, "have a seat." I sat. I didn't take off my jacket. "Let's skip the posturing," David said, leaning forward. He folded his hands on the polished mahogany table. "You caused a massive problem for my firm. Brenda was a liability. Yes, we've known she was cutting corners for a while, but we handled it internally. We corrected the issues quietly. You sent a municipal blueprint via certified mail, creating an undeniable, legally discoverable paper trail that proves we approved a negligent appraisal." "I proved she was lying," I said. "You proved you have too much free time," David shot back, his voice dropping an octave. "Because of your letter, the buyers are demanding $250,000 in repairs, plus punitive damages. If this goes to court, they will subpoena all of Brenda's past appraisals. Do you know what happens if they do that?" I remembered the other 4 Harrison-built houses I'd found in the county records. "You lose a lot more than $250,000. David's eyes narrowed. "You're a smart guy, Mark. So let me explain how this ends. We are not going to let a disgruntled neighbor trigger a class action lawsuit against us. We've drafted an affidavit." He slid a piece of heavy, watermarked paper across the table. "Read it." I picked it up. It was dense legalese, but the core of it was simple. It was a sworn statement from me, admitting that the blueprints I sent were unverified, that my son had misinterpreted the architectural history, and that my actions were motivated by a personal dispute rather than factual evidence of structural failure. "You want me to sign a document saying my son was wrong, and I'm a vindictive liar," I said, staring at the paper. "I want you to sign a document that gives us reasonable doubt to settle with the buyers out of court," David corrected smoothly. "If you sign it, we drop the tortious interference suit against you. We drop the privacy violation claim with the city. You go home, your wife stops crying, your kid goes back to his video games. And if you don't, we bury you," David said. He didn't yell, he just stated it like a fact. "We will drag you into a civil suit that will cost you $50,000 just in retainer fees to defend. We will subpoena your personal emails, your bank records, your texts, and I had a very interesting phone call with Brenda's husband an hour ago. It seems you have some undocumented square footage in your home." My stomach dropped. They were working together. Scott hadn't just come to my house to blackmail me. He had already sold me out to David to buy Brenda some leniency. "Scott gave you the photos," I said. "Scott is a man trying to keep his house," David said, leaning back in his chair. "He understands leverage. You don't. You think this is a moral crusade. This is business, Mark. You stepped onto the tracks to stop a train, and now you're surprised it's about to run you over. Sign the paper." He slid a silver pen across the table. It stopped an inch from my hand. I looked at the affidavit. If I signed it, I was publicly calling my son a liar. I was putting my signature on a document that said Leo's hard work, his intelligence, his passion was just a misinterpretation fueled by my own pettiness. I'd be telling him that being right doesn't matter if the people you're up against have enough money to crush you. But if I didn't sign it, Sarah was right. We could lose the house. We could be bankrupted by legal fees. The city would tear apart our home. I picked up the pen. It felt heavy. "If I sign this," I said, my voice thick, "what happens to the buyers on Highland Drive, the ones with the rotting foundation. We'll settle with them for a fraction of the cost, David said dismissively. They'll get enough to patch the mold, and they'll sign a non-disclosure. The market moves on. Everyone wins. Except Leo, I said quietly. Leo is 15, David said. He'll get over it. Buy him a car in a few years. I held the pen over the signature line. The paper was crisp. The silence in the conference room was absolute, broken only by the faint hum of the HVAC system. I thought about Sarah, packing a bag and taking Leo to her parents' house, looking at me like I was a stranger. I thought about Brenda's sneer in my kitchen. Let the adults do the heavy lifting. I put the pen down. David let out a long, slow breath. Don't be stupid, Mark. I'm not signing it, I said, pushing the paper back across the table. You can't use Scott's blackmail if I report myself first. David frowned, the polished veneer cracking just a fraction. What? The attic, I said, standing up. I'm going to the city planning office on Monday morning. I'm going to report my own unpermitted renovation. I'll pay the fines. I'll pull the permits retroactively. It will cost me a fortune, and my wife might actually divorce me, but you won't have it over my head anymore. You're bluffing, David said. His voice was sharper now. Try me, I said. And as for your lawsuit, go ahead. Sue me for sending a public document to your office. Let's get to the discovery phase. Let's subpoena the records for the other 4 Harrison properties Brenda appraised, the ones I found in the King County database this afternoon. Because if you sue me, I'm not just defending myself. I'm countersuing for malicious prosecution, and my lawyer is going to ask for every single appraisal your firm has done in Queen Anne for the last 5 years. David didn't speak. The silence wasn't corporate and controlled anymore. It was tense, tight. I walked to the door, grabbed the handle, and looked back at him. I'll see you in court, David. Or you can drop your suit, fire Brenda, and fix that family's foundation. It's your call, but I'm not putting my name on a lie. I walked out of the glass doors, stepped into the elevator, and hit the button for the lobby. My hands were shaking so hard I had to shove them into my jacket pockets. I had just declared war on a multi-million-dollar real estate firm, and I had just committed to turning myself in to the city for code violations that would drain our entire savings account. I got to my car, sat in the driver's seat, and stared at the steering wheel. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a cold, crushing reality. I pulled out my phone and dialed Sarah's number. It went straight to voicemail. Hey, I said to the recording, my voice cracking. It's me. I didn't sign it, but I did something else. I need you to come home. We have to talk about the attic, and we have to talk about how we're going to pay for it. I hung up and started the engine. The drive back to Bellevue felt twice as long. When I pulled into my driveway, the house was completely dark. Sarah hadn't come back. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The house felt empty. The manila envelope Scott had left was still sitting on the entryway table. I walked past it, into the kitchen, and stopped. Sitting on the kitchen island, right where Brenda had left her tablet on Sunday, was a single sheet of paper. It wasn't there when I left. I walked over and picked it up. It was a printed email. The sender was Claire, the mom from the Bellevue group chat who had sent me Brenda's crying video earlier. The message was short. Mark, Sarah asked me to drop this off for you. She didn't want to email it. You need to look at the date on the bottom. Brenda didn't just find out about your attic 3 years ago. She's been using it. Attached to the email was a forwarded message thread. I squinted at the text. It was an email from Brenda to her insurance underwriter, dated 2 years ago. It was a claim adjustment for our property. Brenda hadn't just kept quiet about the attic. She had actively used her credentials to manipulate our home's risk profile in the local database, flagging our property as a high-risk liability due to suspected structural instability to secure a kickback from a premium adjustment scheme her firm was running on the side. Our homeowners' insurance rates had gone up 40% over the last 2 years. We thought it was just inflation. It was Brenda. She had been bleeding us financially for 2 years to pad her own margins, using our illegal attic as the unspoken justification, and Sarah had just found out. I sat there for a long time, just staring at that email printout. The kitchen clock was ticking, a steady, rhythmic sound that felt like a hammer hitting a nail. 40%. Our premiums had gone up 40% in 24 months, and every time I'd complained about it to Sarah, she'd sighed and said it was just the Bellevue tax, the price of living in a zip code that was constantly being reevaluated. Brenda hadn't just been a bad friend, she'd been a parasite. She'd sat at my kitchen island, eaten my food, hugged my wife, and patted my son on the arm, all while she was funneling our money into her firm's pockets. I felt a surge of nausea so strong, I had to grip the edge of the counter. I reached for the house phone. I needed to call my insurance agent, a guy named Miller, who had been handling our policy for a decade. I didn't care that it was after 6 p.m. I had his cell number from when a tree limb fell on our garage 3 years ago. Mark, Miller answered, on the third ring. He sounded like he was at a restaurant. I could hear the clinking of silverware and the low hum of a crowd. Everything okay? I saw the news about that Highland Drive mess today. People are talking. Miller, I need you to be honest with me, I said, my voice sounding ragged even to my own ears. I'm looking at an email. It's about a risk adjustment on my property from 2 years ago. Brenda Vance filed it. The line went quiet on his end. The background noise seemed to fade away as he moved to a quieter spot. Mark, I can't discuss internal adjustment triggers over the phone. She flagged my attic, didn't she? She used a private conversation to trigger an unverified structural liability flag so you guys could hike my rates. And she got a commission on the risk mitigation side of the brokerage, didn't she? Miller sighed. It wasn't a denial. It was the sound of a man who knew a secret was out. The firm Brenda works for has a partnership with our regional underwriting office. They provide expert eyes on high-value neighborhoods. If an appraiser flags a potential catastrophic risk, like unpermitted electrical in a wood frame historic district, we're legally obligated to adjust the premium or cancel the policy. She didn't flag it because it was a risk, I snapped. She flagged it because she could. We've never had a claim. The wiring is fine. She did it to hit her quarterly targets. Mark, if this goes to a legal review, you realize what happens, right? If you admit the attic is unpermitted to fight the rate hike, the insurance company doesn't just lower your rate. They void your entire policy retroactively. If your house burns down tonight, you're covered for $0. You're trapped in a box, man. Brenda knew that when she filed it. I hung up without saying goodbye. I was trapped. If I fought Brenda's firm, they'd use the attic to destroy me. If I fought the insurance company, I'd lose my coverage. And if I didn't sign David's affidavit, they'd sue me into the dirt. I heard a car pull into the driveway. I didn't move. The headlights swept across the kitchen window, illuminating the stacks of mail and the cold coffee mugs. The engine cut out. A door slammed. It was Sarah. She walked in through the mudroom, her face pale and her eyes rimmed with red. She wasn't carrying Leo's bag. She was alone. She saw me sitting at the island and didn't say a word. She just walked over, picked up the email printout I'd been staring at, and crumpled it into a ball. I went to Brenda's, she said. Her voice was flat, devoid of the heat she'd had earlier. You went to her house? I asked, looking up. After what Scott did? Scott wasn't there, just Brenda. She was sitting in her living room with a bottle of wine, surrounded by boxes. She's already packing. She thinks the firm is going to take her car, the house, everything. Sarah leaned against the counter, her bag sliding off her shoulder to the floor. I asked her about the insurance, about the attic, and she didn't even deny it, Mark. She laughed. She told me that we were lucky. She only flagged the attic. She said she could have reported the whole foundation years ago because of the slope of the lot. She told me she was protecting us by keeping the city out of it while making sure we were properly insured for the risks we were too stupid to manage. Sarah looked at me, and for the first time in 15 years, I saw a flicker of genuine fear in her eyes. She's not sorry. She's convinced she's the victim here. She told me that if you don't sign that paper for David, she's going to make sure the city inspector is at our door by Monday morning at 8 a.m. I'm not signing it, Sarah. I already told David. Sarah closed her eyes. A single tear tracked down her cheek. I know. I saw your car leaving the city. I talked to my dad. What did your father say? He said you're being a hero for a kid who doesn't need a hero, and you're burning down our life to do it. He said he won't help us with the legal fees if you don't sign. He thinks you're being ego-driven. Ego-driven? She insulted Leo. She called him a liar in his own home. I know. Sarah finally broke, her voice rising to a sob. I know she did, and I hate her for it. But Mark, we have a mortgage. We have Leo's college fund. We have a life here. Is proving Brenda is a crook worth losing the roof over our heads? Because that's where this is going. David called my dad. He told him that if you don't sign by noon tomorrow, the firm is filing a formal complaint against you for tortious interference with a commercial transaction, and they're naming me as a co-conspirator because I was in the room when Leo spoke. I felt the room tilt. They're naming you? They're saying we planned it. They're saying we used our son to tank the appraisal so we could somehow benefit from the property value drop on the street. It's insane, but it doesn't matter if it's insane. It just matters that they can afford to say it in court, and we can't afford to stop them. She walked over to me and put her hands on my shoulders. She smelled like the outdoors and stress. Mark, please, just sign it. We can move. We can sell the house, pull the permits, fix the attic, and just get away from these people. But we can't fight them. They own the game. I looked at her, and then I looked at the hallway leading to Leo's room. He wasn't there, but his presence was everywhere. The posters of skyscrapers on his door, the books on structural load-bearing walls on the shelf. If I signed that paper, I was telling my son that the world belongs to the Brendas and the Davids. That if you're smart and you find the truth, you should keep your mouth shut unless you have enough money to protect it. I can't, I whispered. Sarah pulled her hands away like I'd burned her. Then you're doing this alone. I'm going back to my parents. I'm not going to sit here and watch the city put a yellow tape around my front door because my husband wanted to have the last word. She turned and walked out. I didn't stop her. I couldn't. I heard her car start, the gravel crunching under her tires as she backed out. The house was truly silent now. I went to my desk in the den. I didn't call a lawyer. I didn't call the city. Instead, I pulled up the King County property tax records again. I started looking at the dates. Not the dates of the appraisals, but the dates of the insurance adjustments. I spent the next 6 hours cross-referencing names. Brenda Vance, David Sterling, Miller's Insurance Agency, and 3 other names I'd seen on the Highland Drive project. By 3 a.m., my eyes were burning, but I had found the pattern. It wasn't just my attic. Brenda had done this to 12 other houses in Bellevue and Queen Anne. Every single one of them was a historic build. Every single one of them had a minor, unpermitted improvement. A finished basement, a deck, a loft. And in every single case, Brenda had been the appraiser, Miller's agency had been the insurer, and David's firm had handled the valuation. It was a closed loop. They were identifying unpermitted work during luxury appraisals, using that insider knowledge to flag the properties for the insurance company, and then splitting the increased premium commissions through a shell company registered in Nevada. I looked at the shell company's name on the public filing, B&S Heritage Consulting. B&S, Brenda and Scott, or Brenda and Sterling. I sat back in my chair, the blue light of the monitor reflecting off the dark windows. This wasn't just a petty dispute anymore. This was a racketeering scheme, and they weren't just trying to silence me because of the coal chute. They were trying to silence me because the coal chute was the one thing that wasn't unpermitted. It was a structural failure they'd missed while they were too busy looking for illegal drywall to exploit. The coal chute was the thread that could unravel the whole tapestry. My phone vibrated on the desk. It was a text from an unknown number. I know you're still awake, Mark. I can see your office light from the street. Scott's not the only one who can take pictures. You have 9 hours until the city opens. Don't be a martyr for a 1,905 blueprint. It's just a house. I walked to the window and pulled the curtain back an inch. A dark SUV was idling 3 houses down. The headlights were off, but I could see the glow of a cigarette or a phone inside. They weren't just waiting for me to sign. They were making sure I didn't go anywhere else. I didn't turn off the light. I went back to the computer. If they wanted to play adult games, I was going to give them a 400-page dissertation they'd never forget. I started typing, not a letter to David, but an email to the Washington State Insurance Commissioner's Fraud Division. But as I hit the first few keys, the power to the house cut out. Total darkness. The hum of the computer, the refrigerator, the HVAC all gone. In the sudden silence, I heard the sound of footsteps on the gravel in my side yard. Someone wasn't just watching the house. They were at the breaker box. I didn't move. That's the first thing you learn when you grow up with a father who was a combat veteran and an insomniac. When something unexpected happens in the dark, the worst thing you can do is react before you understand. My dad used to say that panic is just adrenaline with no address. So I sat there, in the sudden absolute blackness of my den, and I counted counted to 5. 1. The footsteps on the gravel had stopped. 2. The SUV down the street hadn't moved. I could still see the faint smear of ambient city light on its roof through the gap in the curtain. 3. My laptop had switched to battery power the moment the house current died. The screen was still glowing. My half-drafted email to the Washington State Insurance Commissioner still open, cursor blinking at the end of the sentence like a small, patient heartbeat. 4. My phone was on the desk, fully charged. 5. I picked up my phone, opened the camera app, and switched it to video. I didn't turn on the flashlight. I just pressed record and set it face down on the windowsill, angled toward the side yard, the lens catching the faint orange wash of the neighbor's porch light on the fence slats. Then I walked, very slowly, very quietly, to the kitchen. I pulled the largest knife from the block on the counter not because I intended to use it, but because holding something solid was the only way I was going to keep my hands from shaking. The back of my house has a door that opens onto a small concrete landing, 3 steps down to the yard. The breaker box is mounted on the exterior wall to the left of that door, behind a locked metal panel. Except it's not really locked. The lock broke 4 years ago during a cold snap, and I replaced it with a carabiner clip from my camping gear. I've meant to fix it every single spring since. I stood at the back door and listened. Nothing. Then the soft scrape of a heel on concrete. Someone was standing on my back landing, between me and the breaker box. Between me and whoever it was, there was only a hollow core door with a deadbolt I had engaged out of habit when I came home 3 hours ago. I had 2 choices. I could call 911 and spend the next 40 minutes waiting while a real estate firm's enforcer or whatever David Sterling had sent to my house had time to do whatever he'd come to do and drive away into the Bellevue dark. Or I could do something stupid. I did something stupid. I unlocked the deadbolt as quietly as I could manage, and then I hit every light switch I could reach simultaneously. The kitchen overheads, the under cabinet strip lights, the exterior flood that Sarah had installed after a raccoon incident 2 summers ago, all of them dead, of course, because the house current was out. But the motion sensor flood on the garage, the one I'd installed on a separate GFCI circuit, was still live. It tripped the moment I yanked the back door open, and the entire rear of the property exploded in white halogen light. The man on my landing was not a firm-hired enforcer. He was not Scott. He was not anyone from David Sterling's soulless glass tower. He was about 50, heavyset, wearing a King County Public Works vest over a flannel shirt. He had a flashlight in one hand and a work order clipboard in the other, and he looked at me and the kitchen knife in my hand with the precise expression of a man who is reconsidering his career choices. "Sir," he said, very carefully, "I'm with King County Utilities. We've had a transformer fault on your block. I need to access the exterior panel to isolate your drop line." I stared at him. He stared at me. "We sent a robocall," he added, with the mildly injured dignity of a man who believes deeply in robocalls. I put the knife behind my back. "Right," I said. "Yes, sorry, long day." "I can see that," he said. The power came back on at 4:17 a.m. By 4:18, I had finished the email to the Insurance Commissioner's Fraud Division. I didn't send just the email thread Claire had dropped off. I attached the entire cross-referenced spreadsheet. I'd spent 6 hours building every Harrison District property, every Brenda Vance appraisal date, every corresponding Miller Agency premium adjustment, every filing date for the shell company B&S Heritage Consulting in the Nevada Secretary of State's public database. I had pulled it all from sources that required no special access, no insider knowledge, no criminal intrusion. Everything David had sneered at as my having too much free time was just a citizen with a laptop and a library card and a 15-year-old who had taught him that the most dangerous thing in any room is a person who has actually read the documentation. I also attached a screenshot of the text message from the unknown number. "It's just a house." I included the timestamp, the number, and a note that a dark-colored SUV had been idling outside my residence from approximately 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. I included the video from my phone camera. It wasn't dramatic. It was just a car, in the dark, not moving, but it was there. I CC'd 3 people on the email: the Washington State Department of Licensing's Real Estate Investigative Unit, the King County Prosecutor's Consumer Protection Division, and a reporter named James Wren at the Times Seattle Times business desk, whose email I had found in 30 seconds on the paper's staff directory page. James had written 3 pieces in the past year about real estate fraud in historic districts. His most recent piece had ended with a note that he was seeking sources with direct knowledge of appraisal irregularities in the greater Puget Sound area. I was a source with direct knowledge. I hit send at 4:31 a.m. Then I turned off all the lights and went to sleep on the couch because the bed felt too large and too quiet and too much like a room where a life had been and wasn't anymore. My phone woke me at 8:52 a.m. with a call from a number I didn't recognize. The area code was Olympia, the state capital. The woman on the other end identified herself as an investigator with the Washington State Office of Insurance Commissioner. She asked me to confirm that I was the sender of the email received at 4:31 a.m. I confirmed it. She asked if I was available to provide a sworn supplemental statement that afternoon. I said yes. She gave me a case reference number, which I wrote on a post-it note and stuck to the refrigerator, right at eye level, directly below the photo of Leo that Sarah had put there when he was about 6 years old, standing in front of Pike Place Market, grinning with a gap where his front tooth should have been. At 9:15, James Wren called. He had a low, unhurried voice, and he asked very precise questions. He didn't ask me if Brenda was a bad person. He didn't ask me if I was angry. He asked me specifically how I had cross-referenced the shell company filing dates to the insurance adjustment submissions and whether I had the original King County blueprint in physical or digital form. I told him I had both because I was the kind of person who makes certified mail copies. He said he'd need 48 hours to run down the independent corroboration on his end before anything could go to print, but that the documentation I'd sent was materially credible. I didn't know exactly what that meant in journalist terms, but I understood it to mean that James Wren was going to work on a Sunday. At 10 a.m., David Sterling's law firm sent me an email. The subject line was, "Re, P. Pending litigation Vance, Sterling Holdings. The body of the email was 2 sentences long. Please be advised that our clients have elected to withdraw the tortious interference claim referenced in prior correspondence. All related cease and desist communications are hereby rescinded. I read it twice. Then I forwarded it to the insurance commissioner's case number. Sarah came home at 11:30. She didn't knock. It was still her house, even if it hadn't felt like anyone's house in 3 days. She came in through the mudroom, and I heard her stop in the hallway when she saw the lights on and the post-it note on the refrigerator with the state case number. She stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at me sitting at the island with a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. "You didn't sign it," she said. No. She was quiet for a long time. She wasn't angry anymore. She was something harder to read than angry. She was tired, in a way that went all the way down to the bone. The way people get tired when they've been bracing for an impact that just keeps not arriving. "My father called me this morning," she said. "David Sterling called him yesterday afternoon to tell him the firm was going to make an example of you. My dad was ready to spend the week telling me you were a liability." She paused. "He called me this morning to tell me that 3 of his colleagues in commercial development had gotten calls from the insurance commissioner's office before 9 a.m. He wanted to know how you got the state involved that fast." "I sent an email," I said. "Mark, I had a spreadsheet." She sat down across from me. She put her hands flat on the granite, in the spot where Brenda's tablet had been, in the spot where Leo had poured his orange juice 5 days ago and casually dismantled someone's understanding of an architectural era, and in the process, accidentally pulled a single thread that unraveled everything. "Is it going to work?" she asked. "I don't know," I said honestly. "They'll fight it. David's firm has very good lawyers, and Brenda's license is already gone, so there's a real question of how much anyone wants to chase this. But the Times is looking at it, and the commissioner's office opened a case, and they withdrew the suit." I looked at my coffee mug. "That's something. What about the attic?" "I called the city planning office when they opened at 8, I said. "I reported the unpermitted renovation. The woman I spoke to said the process for retroactive permits on residential improvements in our district takes between 6 weeks and 4 months. The fines will depend on the inspector's assessment of the electrical." I paused. "It's going to cost us probably between $14,000 and $22,000 to bring it to code, maybe more." Sarah let out a long, slow breath. "Leo's college fund. Part of it." "Yeah." She looked at her hands on the granite. "But Scott can't use it to leverage you anymore." "Nobody can," I said. "That's the point." I took the card off the table. "It cost us real money to do it, but nobody has that card anymore." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Brenda used it for 2 years, Mark. She flagged our house and hiked our premiums for 2 years, and she sat at our island and ate my food and hugged me at every party, and I know, I want to be angrier about that than I am," she said. "But I'm just so tired." "Me too." Leo came home that afternoon. Sarah's parents drove him back without being asked. Apparently, Leo had told his grandfather at breakfast that he wanted to go home because he had a structural engineering forum thread he needed to finish reading, and that was that. He walked in the front door, dropped his bag in the hallway, and stood in the kitchen looking at me with an expression I had not seen on his face before. Not the easy grin he has when he's found some obscure historical fact that nobody at his school could possibly care about. Not the careful, contained expression he'd had at the island on Sunday when Brenda had sneered at him and he'd stepped back with his orange juice and gone quiet. This was something else. He looked, for just a moment, like a person who had looked at the adult world clearly and found it considerably more complicated than it appeared from a distance. "Mom told me about the case number on the fridge," he said. "Yeah, and the firm dropping the lawsuit." "Yeah." He pulled out a stool at the island and sat down. He folded his hands on the granite with a gravity that made him look, briefly, about 40 years older. "Dad, I need you to know something about the Harrison firm." "I'm listening," I said. "The coal chute on Highland Drive," he said. I wasn't guessing. I wasn't going off the picture on her tablet. He looked at me steadily. I'd already been to that house, about 3 weeks before, with a class trip to the Queen Anne neighborhood for a historic preservation project at school. Our teacher had access to the property for a walking tour. I was the only kid who noticed the east wall mortar seam pattern. I didn't say anything at the time because I didn't know whose house it was or whether it mattered. I stared at him. "When Brenda put her tablet on the island," he said, "I recognized the address from the sign outside. I wasn't showing off. I was worried about the people who were going to buy that house." I sat with that for a long moment. "Why didn't you say that?" I finally asked. Leo shrugged, with the practiced economy of a 15-year-old. "She didn't give me a chance, and then everything happened really fast." I looked at my son at the architectural history posters on his bedroom door, at the stack of zoning archive printouts on the shelf that he reads for fun, at the orange juice glass still sitting in the drying rack from Sunday morning, and I felt something shift in the room. Not a dramatic shift, just a small, quiet recalibration, the way a level bubble settles when you finally get the surface right. "Leo," I said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to actually hear it." He looked at me. "You were right about the coal chute," I said, "and being right cost us a lot. Probably it'll cost us more before it's over. There are people who are going to lose real things, money, licenses, possibly more because you saw a mortar seam pattern on a field trip and remembered it 3 weeks later. And I don't want you to spend any time thinking that was a mistake. You didn't rot the foundation. You didn't inflate the insurance premiums. You didn't sign off on a fraudulent appraisal." He was quiet. "You just told the truth in your own kitchen," I said. "That's it. That's all you did." He looked at his hands for a moment. Then he looked up. "Is Mom okay?" "She will be," I said. "We all will be." The Times, Seattle Times piece ran on the following Thursday. James Wren had done his job thoroughly and without drama. The headline was not about Brenda. It was not about me. It was about the shell company, about the 12 families who had been paying inflated premiums on a scheme that had been running quietly through the high-end residential market for nearly 4 years. It was about David Sterling's firm and a state investigation into its appraisal practices. It was about a pattern of systemic negligence in the historic property market that had been invisible until a municipal blueprint request at the King County Records Department flagged a property under preservation easement. My name was in the piece exactly once, in the 15th paragraph, as a Bellevue resident who submitted documentation to the insurance commissioner's fraud division. Leo's name was not in it at all. The morning the piece ran, I came downstairs to find him already at the kitchen island with a bowl of cereal and his laptop open to a structural engineering forum. He had started a new thread titled Harrison Firm, 1895 to 1912, documented coal chute placements by district, King County. It had 14 replies already, from people in Portland, in San Francisco, in Chicago, in Edinburgh, who were apparently just as interested in early 20th century coal chute distribution patterns as my 15-year-old son. "Breakfast?" I asked. "Already eating?" he said, without looking up. I made coffee. Sarah came down a few minutes later, and she stood at the counter and read the Times article on her phone. And when she finished, she set the phone down very carefully on the granite and looked out the window at the side yard, where the breaker box was, where a King County utility worker had stood 3 nights ago with a clipboard and a flashlight, and where the gravel was still scuffed from his boots. "It's not over," she said. "No," I agreed. "Not over. But it started," she said. "Yeah." I handed her a cup of coffee. It started. Outside, the October morning was gray and cold and honest, the way Seattle mornings are in autumn. No promise of sun, no pretense of warmth, just the flat light of a world that is exactly what it is. We stood there, the 3 of us, in a kitchen that still smelled faintly of a brunch that had ended a week ago and a life that had not, and we drank our coffee, and the clock on the wall kept its steady, indifferent time. The foundation was still there. We were still in the house.